personality that last week's parsha is named after. It's being Yisro. And the first pasuk in the parsha introduces him to us. Yishma Yisro, Kohen Midian Chosein Moshe. Yisro, the priest of Midian, right? That's what's found in Mefarshim, Targum Onus Midian Komer, a priest. The priest of Midian, Moshe Rabbeinu's father-in-law. So, Rav Simcha Zessel Broide, who was Rosh Yeshiva in the Chevron Yeshiva, and his Shurim on Chumash have been published, asked, why in the world would we introduce him this way? Imagine that a yeshiva has a Rosh Yeshiva, and the Rosh Yeshiva married a fine woman who's a Gioris, and her father happens to be the Archbishop of Canterbury. Okay, so would we really have to always plaster this all over the place? His father-in-law comes to visit him in work one day. You have to put up sign, we'd like to welcome the Rosh Yeshiva's father-in-law, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Shlita. Right? Like this kind of thing. You know, do we introduce him saying, you know, the Rosh Yeshiva was the son of so-and-so and the son-in-law of the Archbishop of Canterbury. Right? Why would we do it? We even know that in the examples given of the Isra of Onoas Devarim, of saying words which are hurtful, one of the classic things is to tell a person who's a ger tzedek or another person who's changed in life, Zachar ma'asecha rishonim. Remember what you used to do. Right? The classic scenario, you have a shul, everybody's talking during davening, during Kriyas HaTorah. Who's the person who isn't? The ger tzedek. Right? So eventually can't take it anymore, he tells them, shh. So they say, who was singing Jingle Bells last year? Suddenly, shh. Right? That's viewed as Onoas Dvarim. That's a terrible avera in the Torah. To say, why would the Torah itself come and remind us of what Yisro did? Right? That he was Kohen Midian. We find it again. It tells us in the Yichus of the Levim, Ve'elazar ben Aaron lokach lo mibnos Putiel lo leisha. Elazar, the son of Aaron, took from the daughters of Putiel as a wife. And the Ramban explains the whole parsha there, which is giving us the Yichus of the Levim. He says, Hizkir imo shel Pinchas. When it spoke about this, right, this was leading up to the birth of Pinchas. It says because these were very special people, right, that they wanted to let us know who they were and where they came from. And it says that he came from, his mother was Mibnos Putiel. Who was Putiel? We don't recognize this name. So Chazal said that this is a name which represents two people who were in his ancestry. On one hand, he was descended from Yosef, Shepit Pet Beyitzro, that he controlled his inclination, he controlled his Yetzer in the test of Eshes Potiphar, of Potiphar's wife. Umizera Yisro, and he was a descendant of Yisro, Shepite Magolim Lavoras Gilulim, who fattened calves for idolatry. Yichas. You have to identify for Pinchas that that's Davka where he's descended from, and that word somehow includes together Yosef, the epitome of Kedusha, the epitome of non-assimilation in Mitzrayim, of resistance to Eshes Potiphar, with Grandpa Yisro, who was the priest who fattened up calves for Avodah Zarah. It's got to be there in it. Balatorin points out a fascinating gematria. It says Yisro, on one hand, gematria, numerical value, represents Komer Haya La Avodah Zarah. He was a priest to Avodah Zarah. And the other gematria, numerical value, is Torah. That Yisro's name also comes out to Torah. So he says. So we see here that somehow there's a relationship between the two. And there's a reason why the Torah is emphasizing it here. So Reb Simcha Zissel explains the following. He says, Yisro's description, the descriptions we find in Chazal of Yisro's search in Avodah Zarah was that of a person who was searching for the truth. It says, Lo nihiniach Avodah Zarah ba'olam shelo avda. He didn't leave an Avodah Zarah in the world that he didn't serve. And there were lots of Avodah Zarahs in the world. That's very hard work. You have to go and try this religion and try that religion. And each time he tried to do it to the max. What's this expression? Shepite magolim Avodah Zarah. He fattened calves for Avodah Zarah. When he tried out a religion, he tried to put everything he could in it to see what was there, to see what was done the best way. And he tried and he rejected, and he tried and he rejected. And he went and he searched from one to the other. And this searching was part of his greatness. This searching was everything that he brought to the table when he got to the truth. And that made him when he came to the truth, and he came to Torah, so much more. All those things in the past, right, became so much more. Havel Havelim Amar Koheles, he brings the famous image that Koheles said that so many things are vanity of vanities, nothingness of nothingness. All those things are zeros. But a person who's managed to go through that process of searching and saying, this is worthless, when he finally decides and realizes what is true, that's like putting a 1 before all the zeros. And therefore all those things have tremendous value. This is what Yisro had. And therefore, we find an explanation, perhaps for a very puzzling medrash. It's one of these midrashim that you just want to kind of hide and pretend it doesn't exist. It's in the Yalkut Shimoni, and it tells us when Moshe wanted to marry Tzipora, right? It says, "B'shor shomer Moshe liYisro tein li Tzipora bitcha liisho." Moshe Rabbeinu said to Yisro, "I'd like to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage." Right, a gentlemanly way to do it. You speak to the father. Amar lo Yisro. Yisro said, "Kabel alecha davar echad shani omer loch, v'ani nosno lecha liisha." Except one thing I'm going to tell you, I'll give her to you. Amar lo Moshe Mahu. What's the condition? Amar lo aben sheyeh lecha tchilo yeh la'avodah zara, mikan ve'elech l'shem shamayim. Says your first son has to be given over to idolatry, to avodah zara. The rest can be given over to your religion. Right? V'kibel olav. And Moshe Rabbeinu accepted it. He said, deal. Right? Amar lo hishava. Yisro was a little suspicious. He said, swear. Hishava lo. And he swore. Right? So, this is what was happening. It's a puzzling midrash. So here Reb Simcha Zissel said, why in the world, how in the world could Moshe agree to such a thing? Because Moshe Rabbeinu saw the path that Yisro was on. Moshe Rabbeinu was able to see that by the time that it came, that Yisro would be beyond that request. Now, again, Chazal tell us, Rashi brings down that the time Moshe Rabbeinu met Yisro, he had already rejected Avodah Zarah, and that was why he was rejected by his people. That's why his daughters were being persecuted on that day, because he had rejected. So why would Yisro ask Moshe Rabbeinu to dedicate his first son to Avodah Zarah? So I think that the process going on is the following. Yisro at that point was so proud of the search that he went through. He realized that his path to Judaism, his path to Avodas Hashem, came through this exhaustive search that was there, and going through and rejecting and coming, and he viewed that as the ultimate. And he says, my first grandson, I want him to go through my process. I want him to walk my path. I want him to go through that world of Avodah Zarah and see its nothingness and come out to the truth that I had. Right? That's what he wanted. Moshe Rabbeinu knew that he would grow out of it. That's what Reb Simcha Zissel said. And that was why he agreed to it. And in fact, we find no remnant of Moshe Rabbeinu having to do that with his children. And this is a point that I'd like to talk about, moving it from the world of searching through Avodah Zarah to this, to something that affects us in many ways in terms of our own Avodah. There's a constant tension between the growth that a person has through exposure, experience, negation, and then finding the truth, to the process of never having been exposed. Right? This is, a person oftentimes feels a sense of value in having gone through that journey. And there is tremendous value in that journey. Chazal tell us that a person who's oseh tshuva me'ahavo, avilus donos nasim lo kizchuyos. A person who does tshuva with avas Hashem, even those things he did b'mezid, can become positives, can become pluses. I've mentioned the story I saw. There was a famous character in Chassidus. His name was Reb David Doctor. Reb David Doctor was a doctor who was not observant, and at one point in his life met the Chozeh Milublin, the famous Rebbe in Poland, and he became an observant Jew. He became really a quasi-Rebbe, quite a figure in Chassidus. And they say that toward the end of his life, he was sick, and different tzaddikim came to visit him, and at one point he gave what's called in Yiddish akrechts. Akrechts is the traditional old Jewish guy sound, like, oh, something like that. And they said to him, they said, Reb David, what's wrong? Are you worried about the averas you did in your youth? They're all gone. And he sat up in bed, upset, and he said, Chas v'sholom. He said, I don't give up on a single avera. Why? Because I did tshuva me'avo. Every avera became a schus. Right? They're all valuable to me. Right? There is this power which is there in terms of this. I work in my moonlighting life, when I'm not here, I work with 18-year-old girls come to what's called the seminaries here in Eretz Yisrael, and they come. Most of them, in general, have grown up going to very religious schools from age 3 or something like this. And by the time they hit Israel at 18, I bump into a syndrome that we called "I wish I were a Baal Tshuva" syndrome. Right? That's what's there. They get very disillusioned with the boring life that they had, and especially from magazines are constantly full of these exotic stories. Like on a Shabbos afternoon, after the chol, people like to sit down and read about the rock star who became religious, and the fashion model who became religious. So they're all sitting there saying, "Wow, it would have been really great, if I was a famous movie star, and then suddenly somebody invited me over for Shabbos and gave me some chicken soup, and I said, that's it. I'm leaving my career, I'm leaving my boyfriend, I'm devoting myself to God." That would have been something. What happened with me? They sent me to pre-kindergarten in a school called Beis Fromi Blumi. I went there through 12th grade. Here I am in seminary. Right? That's boring. And the question is, again, for everyone, each person who went through a process of seeing, rejecting, taking on, should that movie star then want to send her kid on the path of movie stardom, right, so that she can also walk that path and have that meaningful transformation? Or is she going to send her little girl to Beis Fromi Blumi? Right? Is that necessarily something that will be missing, right, in her? Or is there a positive in that as well? When we look at Yisro, perhaps we find the answer also. Vayishma Yisro heard, Mashmua Shama Uba, Chazal said. What did Yisro hear that made him come to Am Yisrael in the Midbar? What did Yisro hear that made him come to Moshe Rabbeinu? So Chazal said it was Kriyas Yamsuf and Milchemes Amalek, the splitting of the Red Sea and the defeat of Amalek. So I saw brought down from Revelia Lopyan, famous Baal Musar here in Eretz Yisrael, the Mashgiach of the Yeshiva in Kfar Chasidim, said, what was the common denominator that Yisro saw in Kriyas Yamsuf specifically, and Milchemes Amalek specifically, that made him come to run to Moshe Rabbeinu and the Jewish people there by Har Sinai? It says he saw how stupid a person can be. He saw how a person can fool themselves and do ridiculous things. Paro just went through 10 makas. Just went through burying the dead after Makas Bechoros, and then he tells everybody, let's go get him. That's very dumb, right? And it had a very bad result. Amalek, right? Also, Am Yisrael out there in the Midbar, surrounded by Anani Kavod. You have these divine clouds around these people. They just beat up Mitzrayim, and they come out and they attack them and get defeated. That's also very dumb. So Yisro said, you know what? A person can't rely on himself. Like Chazal said in Pirkei Avos, Al tiftach b'atzmecha ad yom moscha. Don't rely on yourself till the day that you die. You can never tell. A person needs a framework. A person needs strength. A person needs rabbonim. A person needs community. A person needs guidance. This is what Yisro came and saw. So even though there's tremendous value on that path for those who the Hashgacha put in the place where they can walk that path, a person has to recognize and try to look for the strength that's in framework, the strength that's in community, the strength that's in bringing a person up to things from their youth, and try to merge the two together. How do you merge it together? Piasetzin Rebbe says that we have a problem in transitioning from the way that we grow up to the way that we're eventually supposed to live. A child learns from those around him. What's proper behavior, what's improper behavior. Right? You see, at a certain age, especially like toddler age, a little kid's always looking over his shoulder, looking at his mother to see what's going to be the reaction to what I do. Right? The baby's pacifier drops out and he's actually old enough, he picks it up and puts it in his mouth himself. His mother goes, what a big boy, how wonderful. He says, that's a cool thing to do. The baby does something else, like eat from the garbage can. She goes, no, what are you doing? Put it down. Like, okay, that's not cool. Right? He's learned something. And you see him toddling around and testing and looking over his shoulder. That's an important stage in life. The problem, says the Piasetzna, is if we don't grow out of that. If we don't become our own independent person, and we're constantly basing what's right or wrong on the reactions of those around us. Then a person can become enslaved to the values of whatever is around you. What they say is good will become your good. What they say is bad will become your bad. And then a person ends up losing himself. You're not yourself. One of the most horrifying ideas, I have an interesting friend who likes to read lots of world literature. He's a big Talmud Chacham, but he's into all sorts of interesting things. He once told me there's a common theme. Every culture, more or less, has scary stories. Scary stories that are told around the campfire at night, different things to scare people. A common image in all these scary stories is the idea of possession, is the idea that a person gets taken over by something else. That's frightening to the very human condition, because the one thing that's the one security blanket that a person always likes to have is that I am who I am. I am me. I may not know much else, but at least I know I'm me. And the idea that you may not be yourself is horrifying. Piaseczna says that a person whose decisions and outlook comes by the society around him entirely, that person's not himself. That person's possessed. He's like a marionette who's being pulled by other people's strings, and that's a frightening image. So what is a person supposed to do? At the initial stages, he said, we do have to grow in an almost robotic fashion. As we bring up children, there's a great strength that comes by bringing them up in Torah and mitzvahs. That Shabbos is approached as Shabbos, and Netilas Yadayim is Netilas Yadayim, and brachos are brachos. And you're not sitting there having a philosophical discussion, are you into the brachos thing today, or are you not? Right? There's an idea, you want to eat? Make a bracha. Right? Make a bracha. There used to be a fruit store I'd go to in Brooklyn, right? And everybody would ask, they would say, how are the cherries? He would say, macha bracha, right? Make a bracha. So this becomes part of the habit. A person goes and takes these things. But you want the person to be able to grow afterwards from the strength of the framework, from the strength of knowing and understanding this is what we do, this is what we must do. And then a person should be able to ask and to learn and to know and to build and to grow and to internalize and to find their own particular connection to it. There's a Rashi which disturbs many people. Rashi talks about the tefillah of Yitzchak and Rivka for children. And it says, Vaye'aser lo Hashem. Hashem answered Yitzchak's tefillah. Says Rashi, lo velo lo. He answered his tefillah, not her tefillah. Why? She'eino dome tefillas tzadik ben tzadik l'tefillas tzadik ben Rasha. You can't compare the tefillah of the tzadik, son of a tzadik, to the tzadik who's the son of a Rasha. So why does this offend people? They say, here it is. Here it is. Everybody always says, don't worry about yichus, all Jews are equal, the ikr is who you are, and take a look at this. Yichus, right? God looks at the person, who's your daddy? Oh, him? All right, I'll answer your prayer. How about you, Rivka? Love him? Reject. Right? That's the way it seems. But it doesn't make sense to us. Isn't there the greatness? Don't Chazal say, B'mokum shebali tshuva omdim, ein tzadikim gemurim yecholim lama? Right? Isn't not the place of Bali Tshuva higher and inaccessible even to the place of the tzaddikim gemurim? So I saw one explanation based on the writings of Alexander Rebbe's that said like this. It says, in the challenge, right, first of all, you have to understand the terms. Right? Sometimes people think tzaddik ben tzaddik means what they would call nowadays frum ben frum, FFB ben FFB. An FFB ain't a tzaddik. Right? There's no such thing that defines it like that. Very often, quite the opposite is true. Right? It says like this. The challenge that Yitzchak faced growing up in the house of Avram was in certain ways greater than the challenge that Rivka faced in the house of Lavan. Because Rivka did a tremendous thing, parting from the ways of her father and creating everything that was there. But what Yitzchak Avinu managed to do was to grow up in a house that was imbued with Kedusha, where there were malachim flying around, and Torah and mitzvahs and everything was the entire breath of every breath he took in the house, and yet he did everything independently. He became his own tzaddik. Tzaddik ben tzaddik. He wasn't just coasting along by momentum of his father. He took that framework that he had from his father, and he became his own tzaddik within that. That's the goal that a person is looking for. Right? To be able to build a framework which cultivates, which protects, which inculcates, but not to create a robot who's empty, and then at the moment that they leave the framework, can't stand up to anything. To create someone who, from that framework, draws strength, uses it to have the ability to grow and to become their own person, and then to be able to go on with it. The dynamic for this is something that the Ksav Sofer wrote about in Parshas Yisro. People have the mistake sometimes. They think that an Orthodox Jew isn't allowed to ask questions. I saw once, years ago, somebody showed me a book review in the New Yorker magazine. And it was a review of a book that was written by a woman who said she grew up Orthodox, and she described in her book the scene of Pesach, the Seder table in her Orthodox home. And it describes everybody sitting around, the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And then she asked the question. She says, why did Paro get punished if God hardened his heart? And all the Orthodox relatives go, Shah, we don't ask such questions. Everybody, I think, has heard this question. The Rambam asked the question. All Mefarshim asked the question. Right? Our way of life is to ask questions and to ask these things. The whole Jewish way of learning is questions. You've seen it in the Gemara. Every day, all you're dealing with is questions. Questions, answers to questions, questions on the answers, questions on the questions. That's what we do. Right? This is the way that we learn. We question and we look and we see. To a Talmud Chacham they say, a kasha, a question, a contradiction is more valuable than a teretz, than an answer. A kasha, I saw the mashal once, they say, what is it when you're learning, and something doesn't fit, you got a question. It's like a person who's in someone's house looking for where they hide the money. And you see the tiles on the floor, one of them doesn't fit good. That's where the money is. When a person comes and you're learning the Gemara and say, wait a second, doesn't that contradict what we learned 2 dapim ago? Bingo. You've hit treasure. It's a wonderful thing, right? Dig and you'll see what you'll find. Wonders and well springs. So the Ksav Sofer says a person is supposed to ask and this person is supposed to question. But it depends within which framework you do so. Because there's a difficulty with questions sometimes. Sometimes a question isn't a question, but a question is an excuse. This is something that Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, the Brisk, said. Say once he had a student who left the path of Torah, and he came back to Brisk, and he saw Reb Chaim, and he rather arrogantly said, oh, Rabbi, I'm glad to see you. I have lots of questions about religion. And he said, tell me, these questions came before you started doing your Averas or after? I said, well, after. He says, they're not questions, they're excuses. They're terutzim. Right? Sometimes a person, we know the power of a bribe. Chazal tell us how careful the Torah is with the power of a bribe. That if you have someone who's a dayan, a rabbinical judge, and someone, let's say a delivery person who would deliver him something usually at a certain time, and he delivers it a little bit earlier, he can no longer be a judge in his din Torah. That can skew him a little bit. Tiny bits, your sense of balance can be off. Hashochad yaver ini pikhin. A bribe can blind the most clever people. Therefore, if Dessler says, a person who likes to say, yes, I examined that area of halacha objectively and I decided that it really doesn't apply nowadays. How objectively can you examine it? Is it going to change your lifestyle? If you would accept that halacha, would it make things more difficult for you? How objective can you be in the eyes of Chazal who viewed a bribe as being something so tiny and subtle? Here, this change to your lifestyle is a huge bribe. You can't claim to objectivity. And therefore, your whole investigation can end up becoming path after path of excuses in terms of what you're looking for. Sometimes a person loves a question almost as a security blanket for his wrongdoing. People describe to me experiences more or less like this. You're sitting on a bus, you're in Israel, and whatever, you take out your little chumash to look at Parashat HaShavua, and there's some gentleman sitting next to you, grew up on, a communist kibbutz or something like this, and suddenly he jabs you with his elbow. He says, can God make a stone so heavy you can't pick it up? Huh? Oh, see? And then he goes, what was that? What was that? So what that was a feeling of discomfort in seeing somebody learning the Torah that's been the heritage of our people. And what does he have as a security blanket? There are questions. Rav Lau, the former chief rabbi of Israel, current chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, went through the Holocaust as a child, speaks, educates about the Holocaust very much. The child in Buchenwald says it bothers him so much when he sees all sorts of people, right, who weren't there saying, no, of course I can't be observant because God let the Holocaust happen. He said, were you there? Right? I was. Right? And many like me were. Right? You're taking this and you're making it your security blanket. You're using that for your justification in terms of this. So, a kasha, a question, you'll meet it out there when you talk to everyone. I've met people say, I thought about looking into orthodoxy, but they denigrate women, so I really can't look at it. Right? Baruch Hashem, they denigrate women. I don't have to look into that idea of keeping Shabbos or kosher or things like that. Did you look? Did you speak to an Orthodox woman? Did you read about it? Did you investigate? No, because you want the question as opposed to the answer. So the Ksav Sofer said, here's my formula for proper Jewish questioning and investigation. Accept upon yourself to keep the entire Torah as it's been kept through the generations. Everything in the Torah, in Chazal, all these things, accept yourself upon to take it, to do it. Whether you understand it, whether you don't understand it. Now ask. Ask and ask and ask and ask and ask and learn and see what you can do, and it won't skew you because you have the strength of that framework. That's what Yisro saw. Mashmu Shama Uba. People can deceive themselves. People can fool themselves. You need the framework. You need Moshe Rabbeinu and Moshe Emes, Torah Emes. And you need a system of Mishpatim and Dayanim, and he himself participated into doing that to make sure that there would be a system in Am Yisrael where everybody has someone to ask, and everybody has authority over them. Sorry Alofim, sorry Meos, people over the thousands, and people over the hundreds, and people over the tens. Every 10 Jews had someone who was in charge of them. Yisro saw the need for this framework in this community because a person can so easily skew themselves in so many different ways. Right? This is the pathway that we have to try to work in. The Kabbalah of Torah in its totality, with that, within that, the joy of asking and looking. And then when a person sees that, a question is a joy even if there's no answer. All our great Chachamim had unanswered questions in Torah. There's a book which is out there called Kushios Atzumos. Kushios Atzumos is a collection of the unanswered questions of Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Rabbi Akiva Eiger was one of the greatest Gedolim, and in his Chidushim and in his learning, he came up with many questions that he had no answer for. Yet we never saw Rabbi Akiva Eiger tossing off his kippah and heading out right to the local bar because he had a kasha that he didn't understand. How would he end each of these kashas? The phrase would be, V'Hashem ya'ir einai. May Hashem enlighten my eyes. I know the answers are there. I know the truth is there. And over the years, great Talmidei Chachamim tackle these questions and find answers. Sometimes the answers are then questioned, and answers upon answers. And Rabbi Akiva Eiger knew that this would be, and he wrote down these questions. You would think, oh my gosh, if Rabbi Akiva Eiger didn't have an answer to this question, shouldn't he have hidden them away? Right, so that other people shouldn't see that Rabbi Akiva Eiger didn't have answers to his questions and come to a crisis of faith? Rabbi Akiva Eiger says, no, these are delicious. Let the children have my kashas. Let Am Yisrael, for all these things, be bothered. I want yeshiva guys to be staying up at night by the fact that I found these contradictions and that there's no answer to them. Let them wrestle with them. Let them go over them. Let them find answers. Because the answers are there. And the search is the devekus to Hashem, is the connecting to Hashem. That's why Yisro's path was a positive one. He was a searcher. He was searching for the truth, and Moshe Rabbeinu saw that that's where it was going to. His search in Avodah Zarah wasn't a search for the hedonism associated with Avodah Zarah. He didn't go to Avodah Zarah because it was more permissive than the world of Judaism. Yisro was searching and rejecting and searching and rejecting. He says, I want to know truth. I want to know what HaKadosh Baruch Hu created this for. I want to know what He creates it for. And within that context, then his questioning all became positive. All of that became more and more. Yisro on one hand, Komer LaAvodah Zarah. He was a priest to Avodah Zarah. On the other hand, Yisro was Torah. Yisro was Zoche, to have a parsha in the Torah named after him, to have additions in Am Yisrael that were brought there. And his path is one that we can all incorporate into our lives. As we try to build it, this combination, the framework of the tzidkus, like Yosef HaTzadik, Putiel, Shepitbeit v'Yitzro, the one who fights the Yetzer, Eshes Potifar, who's the outside world of Mitzrayim, and all it has to offer going like this. Yosef says, no way. Right? Ani Yosef. I remain who I am. Right? Mustiokno Shalaviv. He saw the image of his father before him, and he didn't swerve from his ways. And Yisro, Shepite Magolim Avodah Zarah. Yisro the searcher. Yisro, the one who asks and looks and tries and questions in order to try and find the truth. If we incorporate these into our lives, into the lives of our children, then hopefully we'll have people who are like Yitzchak Avinu, Tzaddik ben Tzaddik, a person who takes this framework that we've created over the generations, a framework of tzidkus, a framework of Torah, a framework of communities and shuls and yeshivas and all these things, but don't simply coast through them on autopilot as an empty shell, but fill themselves with tochen and connection and a tzidkus, and then hopefully we'll follow in that right path.